Joining me now is William Attig, Executive Director of the Union Veterans Council. He was deployed in Iraq from 2003 to 2009. Thanks so much for being with us, William. I wonder what you're hearing from your members and how they're dealing with these layoffs.
I think we're hearing the exact same message those veterans just put forward, the idea of being left behind, being disparaged. I think it's something that we're hearing every single day. And I want to thank you so much for lifting up this story. You know, there's almost between the 28% of veterans that work in the federal workforce and contractors, we're looking to almost 1 million veterans that could be affected by these layoffs. And words matter. We've heard a lot of numbers being thrown around about how many people they want to cut. And if it's towards the high end of what the DOGE committee and what Elon Musk has said publicly, it could be a devastating impact to working veterans across America.
The Veterans Affairs Secretary also announced cuts to the VA, which, of course, provides care to more than 9 million veterans. 36% of veterans in the civil service are disabled or they have a serious health condition. Many of them are receiving care for injuries sustained while they were serving. So what are the ripple effects if their main provider has funding cut?
So for the last 40 years, especially since 2008, the global war on terror, veteran organizations like myself, the American Legion, VFW, have worked tirelessly to make sure that we have veterans preference and programs for veterans to find gainful employment. To solve many of the problems we have in the veterans community, it can start with a job and a career that gives veterans the ability to live the American dream and not have to worry about paying the mortgage next week. We've created these programs because veterans fit into the federal workforce in such a strong way. They've served their country already. They continue to serve. They've got great skill sets. And we made a promise to them. We made a promise to the blank check that they wrote. But then also when we worked to make sure that they took these positions and these careers, many times taking less money than they could in the public sector, or in the private sector, we made a promise to them. And for them to be fired unjustly, that is the issue here. We're all for making sure there's government accountability, making sure that taxpayer dollars are sent. But these people provide critical roles every single day to keep our country going. And so many of them feel like it's second service. FAA workers in Nebraska that just want to make sure that planes can land on time have been laid off with no just cause. And that's something that we've got a bone to pick with. And we just came from a press conference where legislators are putting out legislation now, hopefully to make right by our veterans that have been laid off so far and put accountability into this administration who seems like they just want to press buttons and put names on a spreadsheet and not realize who they're affecting, like that gentleman we heard where him and his family are not sure what they're going to do next week.
Yeah, how do you pay your mortgage? I just want to get your reaction to a couple of things. There was a VA employee yesterday who told the House committee that veterans struggling with the layoffs, with losing their jobs, can turn to a suicide hotline. Almost at the same time, USA Today reports at least 24 operators of the VA's emergency hotline were fired in the DOGE cuts. Data shows more than 1/3 of veterans have a mental health disorder. An average of 17 veterans died by suicide every day in 2024. How essential is mental health support for veterans right now? And what do you make of the statement, well, if you're having a hard time getting fired, call the suicide hotline?
I think it's pretty embarrassing that we're in a position where we have the President of the United States and an unelected billionaire who walks around the world that's paved in gold, while most of us veterans are just working class folks, are putting veterans in a position where they have to call the suicide hotline or be warned to call the suicide hotline or get help. We've had requests of where can they find people, where can they sign up for programs to get food assistance? How can we make sure that veterans have another job to go into that may not be as good as this one? Financial stability is one of the key parts for our veterans community. There's an Army War College study called Financial Instability, a Suicide's Weapon of Choice in the Military Community. And right now, there's almost 1 million veterans who do not know if they're going to get an email or they're getting emails that are threatening or confusing to them, and that's putting them into an uncertain position.
Lewis. Kyle is a U.S. Navy veteran battling stage 4 cancer successfully. A clinical trial at Johns Hopkins funded by NIH saved his life. The funding freeze means that he can't continue with his treatment if he needs it again. Thank you so much for being here, Kyle. I saw Chewbacca, your canine friend behind you, and we're very dog friendly if he wants to say hello. But take us inside what your thoughts are as this news that impacts you directly sort of comes in fast and furious.
Yeah, if I could, if you don't mind, I'm just going to share a quick snippet of my background so people kind of get a feel for and put a face to some of these cuts that are happening, because I know we're all seeing numbers flying around, and, you know, we're seeing things like NIH thrown around, and a lot of people may not necessarily know who they are and what they do. So I'm happy to be here to share my story and kind of put some of these things into a more human angle for people to understand. So as you can probably see from my background here, I'm a California kid at heart. And I joined the Navy way back in the late 1990s, during the relative calm of the late 1990s. And my hope was that I was going to see and surf all over the world. And then 9/11 happened, and that changed things a little bit. And I got to see parts of the world I hadn't anticipated seeing. And so after I got out of the Navy, I spent another 15 years as a counterterrorism analyst working for the U.S. government. In fact, I was working at U.S. Cyber Command when I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in January 2020. And I was given weeks to live in January 2020 at Johns Hopkins. And my doctor said, look, you have to start this very aggressive and experimental treatment now, or you are not going to be here in a few weeks. And those drugs, which, again, as you mentioned, were funded by NIH, that clinical trial saved my life. It is literally the only reason that I am here today. And that is now at risk, as you mentioned, is clinical trials for millions of other Americans across the country who have cancer and other life-threatening diseases, and people, again, as you mentioned, who are far, far more vulnerable than I am, including children.
Kyle, can you tell us what would have happened if the Trump administration had come in at a different point in your treatment, when you were in process and relying on the NIH program?
Yeah, the drugs would have stopped, like, immediately. This funding doesn't just pay for pieces and parts of it. It pays for the entire clinical trial, including things like just turning on the lights and paying the doctors to spend their time doing this. So it's a complete non-starter. When this funding is shut off or frozen, nothing happens at all.
Kyle, what is the thing that people don't understand about government-funded cancer research? I've tried to educate myself, but I think some Republicans say, well, the private sector can do that. But the private sector is in a money-making paradigm, for better or for worse. Can you talk about not just what the government does perhaps better than anyone, including the private sector, but who it helps?
Yeah, it helps everybody. I mean, my first option, if it were, say, 5 years ago, sorry, this was 5 years ago. I got to go 5 years before that. So we'll call it 10 years ago. I would have had to have my system flushed with the same chemotherapy drugs that everyone hates, that have been used since the 60s and 70s, just dumping absolute poison into my body. And so I'm glad that I did not have to go down that route. But that's only because the government has supplied funding to universities and other research centers to help develop these experimental drugs, which, by the way, the drugs that I'm on are still not FDA approved yet for my type of cancer, which was melanoma that spread throughout my body. There's Chewbacca back there, by the way. That's my comfort dog. He helped save my life, too. I can't leave him out of it.
They always do. Always do.
Right. I know. But no, it's absolutely, it would be impossible for, any of these newer treatments to be developed without the medical funding that these medical research centers are getting from the U.S. government.
Kyle, what would it be like for someone right now who maybe is told your story? These experimental drugs are so promising, meet Kyle, and then the cutting gets cut off immediately. Can you just take us inside that?
Horrendous. I can't even imagine having to tell someone that 5 years ago, I had cancer in 40 different places in my body. I was a goner for sure. And these drugs saved my life. And to have them available now to so many people out there, it's an option. It's obviously still a clinical trial, so not everyone can get these, but it's getting there. And so to have people know that these drugs exist and know that some other guy got this treatment, but you can't, because this administration has cut off medical research funding. I mean, that's horrendous.
So, folks, veterans, people in the Navy, as you see there, people in all the branches, they know Donald is screwing them. And he's screwing people in the military now and who used to serve in a whole bunch of ways. There's really three broad ways. One, his approach to global politics puts American lives at risk. Because Donald Trump seems to want to go to war with everybody. And he wants to embolden the worst actors. He only threatened economic warfare with Canada, but he didn't promise to not use force against countries like Panama and Greenland and / Denmark. He only with Canada, but I believe, did he make the explicit promise not to use the military. But it's like all of a sudden now, if you're in the military now, Donald Trump might send you to die on the shores of Greenland. Like, who knows? Like, I don't think the odds are good that happens, if I'm being honest. But the odds are not zero anymore like they were under Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. Trump is still, and his allies still float, illegally sending U.S. military servicemen into Mexico to attack the cartels or whatever. But also the cuts that Trump has done in the military have hurt service people. The cuts to public services have hurt veterans. It's hurting all people, all working class people, but veterans often, people in the military don't make a lot of money. And so they often depend on public services. They can't afford, Donald Trump to hire their own private luxury care. They depend on public services, and when services are cut, they suffer. And finally, for a lot of people that are former veterans but are still working, they're not retired, they've left to go work in the public service, a disproportionate number of the people losing their job are veterans, right? A lot of government programs, you might call them DEI. Republicans only think it's DEI when certain people benefit, but there's been a lot of programs that ensure veterans get, jobs in the public service. And they're the ones losing their jobs. Trump says he cares about the troops, but he doesn't care about anybody but billionaires.